Hi, today we're going to be talking about the functions. That would be chapter 5 for Python for everyone. We've been working on version 3 of the book. So we are going to be talking about the functions. First of all, you have used some functions already, and you're coming to this class with some knowledge of the function. The idea of the function, looking at it as a black box that I don't know what's inside of it. I just know how to use it. So when we are creating function, the idea of the functions are that we're going to be giving it to other people to use it without knowing the details of what the function is doing. So the comments are important. How we're going to name it is important. That's all they're going to see. So we start with our how do we declare a function? So we would have the word we would have a word def. So def is going to start my function. That's the way Python knows we are talking about the function. Just like the other ones that we were using, 2:, means that we're going to start the function here. So we're going to name it as something that's going to have a good, meaningful name, and then we would have parameters here. We talk more details about this. So this would be our header for our function. So we're going to start with a header for it, and then we're going to start writing the code for it, and then we're going to test it. So this would be an example of this. So our function is defined over here. The one that we were having, that's the header of the function. So this is our header of our function. So what is it that this is going to be the body of the function right here. And so this function is going to do this, and it has a return value. Not necessarily all the functions going to have a return value. We talk more about how we're going to do the parameters and all those things. And this one has a return value. So what's going to happen is when we call it, when we call the function, we're going to be passing a parameter. And because it's returning a value, we should assign it to a variable. In Python, of course, if you don't put this, it's not going to complain about it, but that's not going to be the way that we are supposed to do it. This is another one calling the same function with different parameter, so we are getting a different result. So general concept of how to create a function in Python. We talked about this, how we're going to do it. Now, we have to write comments, and we're going to create something called docstring. That's going to create documentation for the code that we are writing. So remember, we have two parts of users for our programs that we're writing. One is going to be the future developers, and one is going to be the end user. So the comments that we're putting over here is going to create some documentation in the format of, we talked about this already, in the format of HTML, a web page, that we can use it internally for the company or externally for the open source. So people can see basically what we're doing over here. So if somebody wants to use this function or is thinking about creating a function, they go to our internal website, and they're going to see this documentation on this, and they can decide if this is something they want to use or they want to make more out of it. And of course, if we have one of the latest IDEs, when we type this in on the IDE, and depending on the IDE, if I go over it, then it's going to tell me what parameters do I need. So when I put a dot in after the name of the object, or when I'm trying to call the function, it's going to tell me the parameters. So let's go over this quickly. So what we are talking about is we have a 2 hashtag and 1 hashtag. The 2 means that we're going to be starting our documentation. So that's, we call it here a Doctrine. So we're going to have some kind of explanation. So right now we are talking about the level of our function. So on the function, we have a short description of what the function is about, then what parameters do we have, and what's going to return. So these things are going to be visible to the future uh, programmers, that they're going to be looking at this, and that's all they're going to see. They're not going to see the detail of our work. Now, one of the things that we got to understand is Python is a scripting language. Scripting language means at the runtime it's going to be compiling. So if I get to this point of the function, and if I call something, it has to have seen it already. So in theoretically, if we don't organize it the way it is right now, and I tell you what, if I call a function here and Python hasn't seen it yet, it's going to complain about it. So if I create a function and I call another function on it, theoretically it has to come before it. Now, to fix this, and of course to go, we look like other languages like C++ and Java, what we're going to do is we're going to create a function called the main. Okay, these are my function declaration. Okay, so we're going to create a function called main, and this is the way we're going to can call it main. And now in our program, all we're going to do is call the main. So when I call this main function, it's already seen all the functions. So what's going to happen is it's not going to complain about it. So we are declaring our functions over here, and we're going to call it right here. So that's a little confusing, but we need to practice and learn it before we move on. So we have a declaration of the main here. We have a declaration of the cube volume here. We have a call to the main here. If you don't do it in this order, then you have to be sure that every time you call a function, that function declaration has to come before it. So let's stick with this format, which is a good format. We're going to declare, call main. I don't have to call the other ones because I'm calling the other ones inside the main. So some practicing to do over here. So when we are passing parameter, of course, the ones who are coming in from C++, they always ask pass by reference, pass by value. We get to those things. We basically, right now, we're making a copy of it for the function that we're going to be using. I'm not going to go through the detail of this because you guys are going to know, you know this already. So parameter is going to be our local variable over here. So if you have some modification on the parameter, then we're going to have a problem because remember the local variable is going to go away after we go off the scope for the function. All the local variable is going to go away. So it's not updating this total. That's what somebody might be thinking about it. So we are not going to be modifying our parameters right now. And then we're going to learn how to do it later. We're talking about the return value. So we can have a return statement to return something. We can have multiple return. And if it hits one, then of course, it's not going to continue with the rest of it. So I can have return, multiple return. One of the things that we have to learn, if I have a function and my function has a return value and I do not return, Python automatically is going to return none. That's basically a null pointer. but this none. So that's going to be automatic. So let's go over this to kind of figure out what's going on here. So we have this function, and inside the function, we have an if statement. So we're saying that if site length is greater than 0, we're going to return this because we are checking to be sure we don't get any negative number. Now, what's going to happen if I get a negative number? If a negative number comes in, it's not going to go to the if statement. It's going to drop off this one. It's going to return automatically, but the return doesn't have no value. So we have to count for those things. I know I'm going over this a little too fast, but we will come back and we're going to review it and we're going to do it. So we should have a different return to count for what's going to happen if this case is not true. So these are the steps that I'm asking you guys to follow for your design. So I'm asking you to create a documentation, a separate documentation. So I'm asking you guys to use a separate document for your design, and you will be following the steps that's defined in the how-to to go. So we're going to say what the function is supposed to do, what are the inputs that we have for the function, types of the parameters that we're going to have. We're going to write the pseudocode for it. This is not a complete code, and then we're going to implement. So 1 through 4, you're going to do it in a separate document. So we can have a potentially functions that don't return any values. If I don't have a return value, I can just use the word return without any values on it. We might want to do this. You guys had this in your previous class. It's like if you had a void function in C++, you could have a return in a void function, but it doesn't return any value. So if something goes wrong, I just want to return in the middle of these things, I can do that. So that's possible here. So the whole idea of the function is what? We're going to create functions so we can reusable, we can reuse the code. So we're going to put one task in a function. One function is going to carry one task. One function, one task. One function, one task. I want to repeat that because I want to be sure you don't put too many things in one function. So when we talk about classes, we talk about functions, we just want to carry over one task. And then we can call it again and again and again. So I want to bring something up over here that I want you to pay attention to it. So when I have a while loop, I'm going to, I talked about this in the other video, I'm going to set, check, and change. So a good planning is I set outside of my while loop. So this is my set area. So in this case, I'm going to get the input, and I'm going to check that input. This is the validation of my input. So if my, we talked about validation, and I'm asking you to do it in your work for this week. So if the hours are less than 0 and greater than 22, we're going to print an error message and we're going to read again. So this one, we're going to do it before the while loop. We're going to start the while loop. If something is not correct, we're going to ask this one at the end of the while loop. So I'm going to stay in this while loop till the user give me the correct number. This is assuming that the user is on the computer at this time. We're going to learn how to deal with other circumstances. So this is the one that's going to check for the hour. And then we have another one that's going to be checking for minutes. Now, we have this one and we have this one. So we are looking at these two and say, okay, what do they have in difference? So I'm looking at this and I'm looking at what do they have in difference. So enter the value between 0 and 59. So in here is 59, here is 23. Then the same 23 is checked over here. The 0 is the same for both of them. And then 59 again is checked over here. So if I want to merge these two together, all I need is this number to come to me. So if I can get this number to come to me, everything else is going to look the same. So I'm going to create a function that's going to be doing these things. And the only parameter that I need is this. Maybe I want to make it one step further, and I want to put the 0 in there as a parameter in case I want to change the lower boundary somewhere else. But that's not what we're going to do right now. Or maybe we do, doesn't matter. So when we write a function, first of all, we're going to put the proper Docker string comments. We are starting with the 2 hashtags, and then we talk about the @param and return and so on. And now we're going to give it a generic name for it. So we're going to give it a generic name, read int up to, and in this case, we're just going to take the high. So we are assuming, and we can of course put it in the comment over here. We can put it in the comments in the top. It says prompt a user for enter a value up to given maximum until the user provides a valid input. And maybe I just want to add a little text that the bottom minimum is 0 or something like that. I want to say that somewhere that people know that we are starting with 0. So because I'm just passing one parameter. So when I have the input, I'm going to put it as generic as possible. Then I'm going to get the parameter. I'm going to change it to a string. And I'm going to display. So that's my coming in. Then I do the while loop, and I'm going to check the value to be sure it's not greater than the high, and it's not lower than 0. Again, I'm checking the lower boundary. So any negative number or anything higher than this number is not going to be acceptable. I'm going to stay here till the user give me the correct one, and I'm going to return this. Now, when I call this, and this is the whole idea of the functions, when I call this, I can call it for the hours, then I put 24 over there, and then I can call it for the 23, and I can call it for minutes for 59, and I have one function that's going to work for those things. And if I have some other ones that have some limits, I can use the same thing for it. So before I write any code, I'm going to think about it. Is this available? Somebody wrote the code already. Did I write it already? Can I merge this repeated code to create a new function? So we do have an else if over here, and in Python we call it elif that we saw it in the previous one. So the idea of the elif is you are going to be checking up to that point. So if I have a for if statement, I'm going to be checking, or the computer is going to be checking all 4 of them all the time. But if I put elif instead of the if statement, then it would check the first one, and if the first one is correct condition, it's not going to check the rest of them. So it's for the efficiency that we're going to be doing that. So I want you to go over this for yourself. Take a look at the stepwise refinement. Uh, this is another example that we are, it's a good one to practice on. So we're going to be writing the numbers in English. So we're going to take all the numbers that we have. Let's say we have up to 100. So we're going to be looking at all the numbers. We're going to translate it to English format. So we're going to group them together. So if I'm looking at the numbers from 0 to 9, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And then from uh, 10 to 19, we're going to call this going to be 10, 11, 12, 13, and so on. And then from above that, then we have 20, 30, 40, and so on. So we can mix up these two together. Of course, we've got to be careful with the zero. So if I have 25, I can say, okay, I get the 20 from here and then the 5 from here. So we're gonna create task, and then this is why we have to spend some time in our design area to be sure that we are designing our stuff to make our code as efficient as possible. So if I have 25, I can get my 20 from this part, and I can get my 5 over here. So I don't need to have this function to do all of these things. This function is just going to give me 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. The ones are going to come here, and the teens are going to come from here. So we're going to break it down in 3 sections. Especially if you're not as strong with your CS2, I strongly suggest you practice on this one. It's a good way of designing. So this is a pseudocode. What I want to bring up about the pseudocode is it's a mixture of the coding and English writing. So I'm asking you guys to write the pseudocode. And remember, the pseudocode is something that is part of our design. So when I am writing the pseudocode, generally I am not thinking about what language we're going to be writing this code. I can write the pseudocode and send it to another group or another part of the country or even outside of the country, and they can write it in a different language. So when you're writing the pseudocode, you got to think about that it is not language dependent. So that means it is not a Python. It is not a code. It is not code. So some people are lazy to do this, so they go and write the code and copy and paste the code here in the pseudocode. We got to do it the other way around. We got to write our pseudocode first. I know I don't like it to do it too, but it is a good habit to learn and be part of it. Especially with the Python, what I like about it is we make things shorter, but we gotta do our pseudocode. Basically, up to this point, we are thinking about it. We are not writing any code. Most of us like to jump in there and start writing code. But we have to do a lot of thinking before we do our code because we're going to be removing a lot of headache at the end of the code if we do it properly. Trust me, we're going to be practicing on that too. So we're going to plan the function. We're going to, at the last one, we're going to convert it to Python. So you can see that in here, we are checking for certain hundreds in the year. So some tips over here. We want to go over it. Keep functions short. Don't put too long. If it is too many concepts in there, too many tasks, break it down to different functions. And so one function is going to do one task. Don't try to put a lot of things in one function. Trace your functions. Be sure that suppose it's going to be doing on paper what you are asking it to do. Another thing that I want to talk about is the variable scope. So when we have functions, we have things, we have local variable, we have global scope. So we have, you guys familiar with this? We're just going to say how it's going to be done in Python. So if I have some local variable inside the function, that's going to be only exist in the function. So it doesn't go outside the function. And not only that, it's going to be related to the sections of our code. So we talk about the block of code. So if we have blocks of code, then those variables so are going to be local to that area. So we're talking about this part that we have sum, square, and I are a local variable to main, and of course local variable to the for loop too. So they might not be. So we're going to talk more about how we're going to do these things. So for example, here I have a variable here called side length, and I have a variable here called side length. This side length over here is local to this function, and it's not the same as this one. So this one doesn't know about the other one. And it's just like, you have the same name for two different people. They're not the same person, they're just having the same name. So we have to be careful with that. Sometimes when you put it like that, especially if you're coming in not very strong from CS2, you might be doing things like that, that you declare a variable somewhere and you want to use it somewhere else. So because they are different, we can use the same name in different locations. We're going to talk about the global variable. I think somebody was asking about it somewhere. So the key here is any function that wishes to use a global variable must include a global declaration. And that's what we're going to talk about. And this is another thing that we say, stay away from it as much as possible. You have to do it, you do it, but really it's not something that we want to do it all the time. So if I put this variable outside of all these things, it's going to be called global variable. It's going to be visible to all the functions. So again, try not to do this. You're only going to do it if you have to do it. Okay, this is something that I want to bring it in. Your book, I'm not sure if it's talking about this or not. I haven't seen it in your book. What we can do is when we're writing our classes, when we're implementing classes, there are some global name has been created for Python. One of them is the name of the program. So every time I'm in the class, so every time we create a class, there's going to be behind the scene, is going to have a name related to them. So we can use true underscore for this global name of the class. So at the end, I can put something. Remember, we said that we're going to declare our methods, our functions. On the top, we're going to put the main. We're going to put the main on the top declaration. At the end, we are supposed to call main. Now, sometimes we want to say that I want to use this class somewhere else. I'm only going to execute main if this class is going to be my main program. So if I put this at the end, I'm going to say if the name of the class is going to be main, I'm going to be executing main. So if I import this, so I put the main in there for testing my stuff, and I'm going to put this at the end of my class. So if somebody want to use my class, they don't want to execute my main. And it's not going to happen because I have this if statement. Because if somebody imported my class, then my program, my class is not main anymore. It's going to be part of somebody else's main. In that case, it's not going to execute this. If it's by itself, it's done alone, then it's going to execute this. It's a very, very useful. I didn't see it in your book, but you tell me if you see it. Okay, so I'm not going to go over this one. I'm going to stop right here. We come back and we might go over next week for some special functions, some image processing, and some of the graphics that we missed, and some other tools that we missed in the other chapters. So we're going to spend some time on those.